Energy media readers, KXL, the Keystone XL pipeline, has been in the news lately because the Alberta government is investing up to $7.5 billion in the project. So that gives it lots of attention in Canada. But today, TC Energy, the proponent, lost a key legal case in Montana. To discuss that, we're joined by Jared Margolis from the Biological Diversity Center. So welcome to the interview, Jared.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Now, this is an important decision from your point of view. Why don't you give us a review of what was actually being contested and the decision that the judge made?
We were challenging the Army Corps' nationwide Permit 12 program, which is a nationwide permit that allows pipelines to cross waters of the United States, rivers, streams, and wetlands through a very streamlined process with a limited amount of environmental review. And our argument, particularly the one that we ended up winning on, was that the Army Corps didn't consider the impacts to listed species, to endangered and threatened species, when they issued this nationwide permit program. And the judge agreed with us. They said that they didn't go through what they call programmatic consultation to consider the impacts of that program on these imperiled species. And really this causes a lot of uncertainty in terms of pipeline construction, particularly for Keystone XL, which is relying on these nationwide permits to allow it to cross these rivers and streams. And now it can no longer do that. So they might need to seek an individual permit. They might have to wait until the Army Corps goes through this process. The court remanded the permit back to the agency to reconsider and further consider impacts to endangered species. And so they need to go through a process that could take many months, if not a year or more, to complete before they can rely again on this permit.
So my understanding is that there are quite a large number of water crossings in this particular project. And is there a possibility that TC Energy would have to apply for individual permits for each one of the crossings?
Yeah, so there are hundreds of water crossings for Keystone XL, and they would have to apply for an individual permit. The individual permit would actually, you'd apply for the whole project, but each individual water crossing would have to be analyzed separately and distinctly and in a much more rigorous fashion than happens under the nationwide permit process, where there's almost no analysis whatsoever. So this would cause the Army Corps to have to go back and really look at the impacts of this project. And we believe that when they do, they'll see that the impacts are much greater than they originally perceived.
Is there any chance that TC Energy will appeal this decision?
It's very likely. We think that they will, and we'll have to consider our options and how we're going to move forward with the court following an appeal. Having read the judge's decision, I think he made a great decision. It's well thought out. It's supported by law. I think they're going to have a tough time appealing this, but we're fairly certain they will appeal it.
In any event, there's at least a significant delay to the project as a result of this decision, as I understand it.
At least portions of the project. They don't need this permit for areas where there's no water crossings. However, there are hundreds of water crossings scattered throughout the entire project area. And so much of the project now can't move forward with construction because they can't do any construction through waterways.
Now, Jared, I want to talk about an issue that's a little bit broader than that. And I assume that this action was brought under the National Environmental Protection Act, NEPA, as it's called. And there's a significant number of people in Canada who believe that pipelines are never protested, they're never litigated in the US, they have a much easier time of it. But my understanding, because I've interviewed, people like Professor Victor Flatt, who's energy law at the University of Houston, that in fact most pipelines projects are litigated, and they're done under NEPA for kind of this reason, to make sure that everything is done exactly the way the Act requires it to be done.
We challenge pipelines under the National Environmental Policy Act routinely. This challenge came not only under NEPA, but under the Endangered Species Act. And that's actually the statute that we ended up prevailing on, was the lack of Endangered Species Act analysis, but there's a lot of connections between ESA and NEPA. But we challenge almost every pipeline that is permitted or that is set for the US is challenged by environmental groups, by local landowners, by native groups. This is not something that is specific to Canadian pipelines. We're worried about not only the impacts on the ground to species, to endangered species and other wildlife, we're also worried about the greenhouse gas implications of these pipelines and how that affects people and species. So, our mandate, our goal is to stop these pipelines, to try to get America to move past fossil fuel dependence, and the implications it has for our people, our wildlife, our climate. And so we challenge, I mean, every pipeline that we can, and certainly not just those that go into Canada, but those just in America as well.
Gotcha. And this may come as a surprise to you, but there again is a significant number of people who believe this conspiracy narrative that has taken hold here, that the opposition to Canadian pipelines is funded and driven and organized by U.S. foundations like Tides Foundation. And in your experience, because you've been doing this for a while, is that the case with environmental groups that are opposing these pipelines down in the U.S., that the foundations are driving it, or is there, you know, individual organizations and landowners and so on that are the real drivers?
It's absolutely the individual organizations and landowners. I get called in by landowner groups all the time to try to fight pipelines, especially endangered species issues, which is my focus. I don't know about funding, particularly through these foundations, but my understanding is that we're driven by donors, by members, most of which give small amounts of money because they care about the environment, want to see it protected. I bring cases to my group all the time to challenge pipelines or similar projects that I just hear about or read about that have nothing to do with it, weren't brought to me by anyone, that weren't raised by any group, and my group is always excited about me challenging these types of projects. So from my experience, the work is driven by people that care, that are dedicated to protecting the environment, such as environmental lawyers like myself that hear about or read about projects, the landowners that are directly affected, the Native American groups that are directly affected. I've seen no influence by organizations like that into our work or which projects we challenge and what we do. It's just, from my perspective, I've never had any pressure put on me to take on a case because of that, and I don't see any influence from those organizations in the work that we do, certainly.
Jared, thank you very much for this, and I'm sure we'll be talking again because this issue doesn't seem to go away, and no doubt there'll be, we'll see from further decisions and other legal challenges. So thank you very much for this.
Thank you. We're going to continue the fight against this pipeline and others, and we appreciate your help. Thank you.